Hey everybody, Milton Davis is here. He's here, and tonight I'd like to talk about the world of Fredonia, which is the world in the backdrop behind the series From Here to Timbuktu, and just to give you guys some information about it and give you some more details about the world in which this adventure takes place. I'm going to start a little bit, go back a little further, and just talk about alternate history in general. I've always been a big history buff. Always like to read history. As a matter of fact, I probably read history just as or more enthusiastically as I read science fiction and fantasy. And of course, as during my time reading history, I came across the whole concept of alternate history. And if you're familiar with alternate history, it's basically people taking history as it is and saying, what if? Basically, like, what if this happened instead of that happened? What if, for instance, what if the Mongols had marched across the entire continent of Europe? And what if the Egyptians had spread beyond Africa and conquered the Middle East? Different scenarios like that. What would be the results of things like that? But usually, when you read alternate history, it's something that's coming from a Western European or American standpoint. So you kind of deal with the same things. One of the most popular tropes in alternate history is what if the Civil War had never ended, or what if the South had won the Civil War, or what if the Nazis had won World War II. And if you've been involved in fiction for any length of time, you've probably seen these different scenarios. So when I started thinking about doing alternate history, I wanted to do it from a different point of view, do it from an African/African diaspora point of view, ask the what if questions from that point. And I'm not the first person to do this. The first person that I know of that did this was actually Steve Barnes and his book Lion's Blood, and the sequel to that, Zulu Heart, where he actually imagined a scenario where Africans colonized the American continent. And the story is a very good novel, and it not only goes into this alternate scenario, but it really deals with the condition of slavery and how even if you flip the scenario, that how some things would actually continue to be the same and some things might be different. And so this is one of the books that I read earlier on that kind of made me think about the concept a little more deeply. So let's get to Fredonia. When I began writing as an author, I had a number of different ideas that I was thinking about doing, and one of them was a alternate history scenario. And the question that I asked myself was, what if the Haitian Revolution had spread from Haiti into the southeastern United States? And I felt like this wasn't such a far-fetched ideal, because if you really look at history and you look at what happened after the Haitian Revolution, there were a lot of similar revolts slave revolts that occurred throughout the Caribbean that was sparked by the Haitian Revolution. And actually, there was a slave revolt in on the American continent that was inspired by the Haitian Revolution. It was called the German Coast Revolt, something that really just came into light nationally a few years ago when the 200 year celebration of the revolt was 200 commemoration of the revolt was actually held in Louisiana. And there's a reason that a lot of people didn't know about this, was because the um, the information about it occurring was actually suppressed. This was a huge revolt. There was over 500 enslaved Africans that took part in this revolt, and it was an organized revolt because a lot of the people who were part of the revolt were people who had taken place with similar situations in areas that we now know as Angola and we know as Ghana. And once it was suppressed, there was a major effort to make sure that the knowledge of it did not leak beyond Louisiana. I had the privilege myself of visiting the German coast a few years ago, specifically at the Whitney Plantation, and they actually have a commemoration of that particular revolt. They actually have a monument dedicated to the leaders of that revolt. So when I was thinking about the Fredonia, the whole concept of Fredonia, I was imagining that there were agents from Haiti that came to the southeast United States and helped coordinate these revolts. So what started from the German coast ended up spreading throughout the southeastern United States, and eventually ended up being a revolt that could not be put down, and the establishment of a new country, which I call Fredonia. And being the imaginative person that I try to be sometimes, I actually sat down and said, I'm going to scribble a map. And then I took my scribbling and I sent it to Sarah Macklin, who's an amazing map creator, and she made it look like actual maps. So when we look at we're looking at the world of Fredonia, looking at the continent from one scenario, this is an image of it. It's going to focus in. As you can see there, we have an area that we designate as Fredonia. Then the northeastern and some of the Midwest of the United States is still considered the United States of America. Then you have New Haiti, and the reason I came up with New Haiti was because, after Napoleon tried to reconquer Haiti and failed, he basically sold what he called the Louisiana Purchase to the United States. In my scenario, what happens is that the Haitians actually claim that territory themselves, at least some of that territory, and they form what is called New Haiti. Between next to New Haiti is what I call the nations, which is basically a union of different Native American tribes that have come together to protect themselves from encroachment. And also then there's New Spain, or what I call Nuevo España Nuevo, and it's actually based on the New Spain scenario that existed in the United States that went from the 1536, I think, to like 1821, which included Mexico and the southeastern United States, California, that region. And then there's Oregon. And Oregon is basically in the corner, the northeastern part, the northwest part of the United States, which had close ties to Russia during that time because a lot of Russians had actually come across through Alaska down in that region, and there was a strong Russian influence. So this is basically the American continent. Of course, up north is Canada. This is the American continent in my alternate history scenario. When you look at it a little bit more closely, which I do in this map, I focus on the different states. This is where I took a lot of creative license, because when you have to look at in the time where this revolt takes place, and not too long after the German Coast Revolt, which was like in 1811, Georgia was actually considered the West. There really weren't any states established beyond Georgia. Most of that area was basically controlled by Native Americans. As you see here, I have a state called Echota, which is basically the part of the South, which was controlled by the Cherokee nations. Then you also had the Creek and the Chippewa and other nations that were in the part of the South as well. And in this scenario, these Native American tribes would still be in these areas because of the fact that this would have happened before the Trail of Tears. So you wouldn't have had the forced migration that occurred during that time. The country of Fredonia, as it was formed, incorporated all these people into it. It was not a situation where only just had freed, emancipated, enslaved Africans, but you also had other people as well. You had the white population that didn't flee the South after the Revolution. You had the Native American populations that were still the indigenous people that were still in the area. And if you notice here, I also formed another little state on the edge, which is called Gullah Land, because if anybody who has visited the coastal areas, the low country of Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina, you would be familiar with the Gullah people who have a distinct culture. And so I wanted to include that into this state scenario. I also show the fact that Florida is basically still controlled by Spain somewhat, and New Spain as well. So I incorporate all that into this. So what does that mean for my scenario? Well, this is where alternate history kind of comes down to being whatever the person who is creating it wants to see it to be. Now there will be some people who will argue the details and say, well, this is this should be this way, or this couldn't have happened and this couldn't have happened. But I feel once you enter to the realm of alternate history, anything could happen. Anything could logically happen. In my situation, as far as Fredonia is concerned, you have a lot of things that upset the balance. There still is a War of 1812. In my scenario, but in this scenario, it's basically the what I call the reunion war, and this is where the United States has decided, look, we want to reclaim the South, and one of the allies that Fredonia has during this war is the British, because the British still sore from the American Revolution, and anything that they can do to upset the balance there, they would be more than happy to do. There's also an alliance between Fredonia and New Haiti. Now, originally, after the people in the South had claimed their freedom, the Haitians wanted to see this part of the American continent become part of New Haiti. But there was a difference. There was a cultural difference because basically, this was a British American type culture dealing with a French Creole culture, and there was some distinct differences there. So instead of them becoming one country, they became two separate countries, but they have an alliance with them. And when the war first breaks out between Fredonia and the United States, the New Haiti is basically taking a neutral stance. But eventually they get into the war, and that makes the difference. And that's one of the reasons why the Fredonians win the Reunion War, the first Reunion War. And there will be another Reunion War, but I'm not going to talk about that. Also, some of the other things that you would look at and seeing how this would have affected, even situations in Europe. One of the things that I contemplate and I talk about is once Fredonia is formed after so many years, they start to reach out and form diplomatic relations with different countries, especially in West Africa. They have diplomatic relationships with the Kingdom of Dahomey, the Ashanti Kingdom, and different things like that. And one of their primary goals is that they are for the abolition of slavery, and they also are trying to form relationships with African kingdoms that participated with the slave trade and trying to discourage them from doing that as well. Something that the British tried to do once they abolished slavery and wanted to enforce that on the rest of the world because of the British the way they are. So there's a lot of cool things to play with in this scenario. And this kind of gives you an idea of Fredonia. A couple of things I wanted to show you guys as well. This is the Fredonian Flag. If you notice, it uses the colors from the Haitian flag. Again, that's because of the close relationship between Fredonia and Haiti. In the center of it is an adinkra, and this adinkra stands for freedom. Now, again, that's taking creative license. I personally don't know if there would have been a situation where someone was familiar with the adinkra symbols from the Ashanti Kingdom. I thought this would be basically a good symbolism for it. Actually, Marcellus Jackson, who did the artwork, was one of the people that brought that up as well. And then there's we call the crest or the symbol of Fredonia, which is this here, and it's basically freedom, honor, and grace. A couple other things that I look at when you start to read the books that you'll notice is that I place Fredonia as a very advanced country as far as technology is concerned. And the reason that I do that is that you now have a country which is about equality in a situation where every person is involved in the country on every level, government, social, intellectual level. So I imagine that when you have a country like that where everyone is excelling and everyone is allowed to participate, that would to me naturally lead to having a country where your technological and social advances would be ahead of everyone else, because there was so much time and energy in Western culture to keep certain people in their place. And in a lot of situations, there may have been people who had that knowledge and expertise and intelligence to come up with some of these advances that never got a chance to because they weren't being recognized and being given the opportunity to. So when I imagine Freedonia, I imagine it as a country where people are thriving and people are allowed to participate in the society fully. And the result of that is that you get an advanced society, you get changes and scientific advances happening because you have full access and and take full advantage of all the people in the nation, not just a small privileged few. And you'll see that in the stories. One of the first things that times I bring that scenario up is actually in Steampunk. And Steampunk anthology is actually when I introduced the whole Fredonia world. And the story that I wrote, which is the first story in the book, is called The Delivery, which is about an escort, which is basically a steam bot, who has been hired to escort a woman to the United States to meet her beau. And the story is actually told from the point of view of Steambot. And that right there to me sets the whole stage and scenario of Fredonia and what it's all about. the novels that came out after the book, basically From Here to Timbuktu, which is actually the novel on which the animated series is going to be based, doesn't really delve as deeply into the country of Fredonia as it does with the characters and their adventure. One of the characters that is brought up in the book, Farmer Aketa, is actually a warrior from Mali. And his background is the fact that in the Sahel, in that part of region of Africa, there are remnants of a civilization that was advanced far beyond anything that we have now or they had now during their time. And this was a civilization that existed before Kemet, before Kush, and had made a lot of technological advances. And the kingdom of Mali and their Haros, which are the warriors, had discovered this city buried under the sands of the Sahara, and they found this. I say this advanced civilization. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but their their knowledge is kept in a series of books, and the book is and From Here to Timbuktu is about Farmer Aketa and Zeke Culpepper, who is a bounty hunter from Fredonia, combining forces to find one of these books that have been stolen because of the knowledge in this book. Book is stolen by a Prussian general who became aware of the books and feels like the knowledge in this book will give Prussia the power to become a major player in Europe and stuff. So that's kind of sets the stage of what's going on in From Here to Timbuktu. One of the cool things about writing this situation in the alternate history is that sometimes when I was creating scenarios for the book, I found out they actually had actual historical incidents that I could use into the book. One of them was the German Coast Revolt, and another one was when I was writing the sequel to From Here to Timbuktu, La Rosa de Matanzas. In this book, I was writing about Zeke's love interest, Pauline Rose, and I imagine her being from Cuba and that she had fled Cuba because she was a revolutionary and the revolt had collapsed and she had to leave the country. And as I was writing the book, I actually found out that during the time period that I was dealing with, there was an actual Cuban Revolution going on, and that the one of the major generals of this Cuban Revolution was a black man by the name of Antonio Maceo. And Antonio Maceo was considered like one of the a brilliant general. Some of the tactics that he was using during the time of this revolution were placed on the same level of some of the things that Napoleon did. And I was just amazed by this. And so I had to go back and rewrite the story where I could incorporate Antonio Maceo into this book, because there was no way I could write about this revolution and not include this man as part of it and stuff, you know. So that became part of the story itself. So basically, I hope I'm not rambling or anything like that, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea and a little bit of the foundation of the world where From Here to Timbuktu takes place. It's a wide-ranging story. It literally goes from here to Timbuktu. You get to follow Zeke and Farmera into all these different countries, and you get a chance to see a glimpse of some of the relationships between Fredonia and other countries are brought up in the book, and so it gives you gives you somewhat of an insight of what's going on, and it's an exciting story as well. Um, and that's it. You know, appreciate you guys for coming to the video. I don't know if I can see it if you guys have any comments or anything like that, but if you do, please post them up here, and I'll try to answer the questions as I can. I'll delay a little bit, give you a chance to ask some questions, because I know there's a delay in the video. But that basically is giving you some of the background of it, and that's what the animation is going to be based on. We launched the Kickstarter on October 18th. I hope you guys are following our page, and make sure that you are so you'll be notified as soon as we launch the Kickstarter. We're doing this basically because we've always wanted to do this animation, and if any of you have had a chance to deal with the scenario that we call Hollywood, it's an interesting situation, and we felt like the best way for us to do this project is to create it ourselves, and with the support from you guys and with the talent that we already have access to, we're sure that we can develop an amazing and interesting and fun animation. So again, it's Milton Davis here, talking to you a little bit about Freedonia. If you have any questions, feel free to get in contact with me, and stay tuned in the group. If you know of anybody else that you think might be interested in this in this adventure, please share it with them. Please have them share the group with them, and we'll see you guys on the 18th. Take care. Peace.